reiterate the same thing I expressed there, which is that I am really happy that we're all back in person and we can interact and I can actually see your expressions and I don't see a black box just with your name on it. Yes, this is really nice. I have a couple of administrative things to do. As you know, in order to be in person, you have to clear yourself each time you come to campus. Now, and then as part of that protocol, before starting class, I have to review who's been cleared and who hasn't, and just gently ask those of you who aren't cleared to come outside and not come back to class until you're cleared. So I'm going to do the really awkward but important and communal thing of just asking those of you who have not been cleared to just step out. Okay. Aya Abbas, Jason Baloo, Haley Broder, Jendlyn Coulter, Natalie Dirks, Aram Gregorian. Okay. Yunsu Jo, Nevedita Kasha, Sophia Lee, Tanya McClendon, Darlene Medrano.
Actually, I don't think the portal you're looking at, it doesn't actually automatically. A lot of this we have somebody that.
You did?
So Kevin checked.
Okay, that's good. Kevin, do you have like a more updated thing? Should I continue going through this or?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think everyone who's here showed me their clearance.
Okay.
Yeah, there were a couple people who were doing it there, they might not show up.
Okay, so am I understanding correctly that everyone in this room has already been cleared?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you for letting me know. So that just put me in an awkward position for mispronouncing everyone's name. Well, on that note, if I pronounced your name and I pronounced it incorrectly, would you kindly do me the favor of letting me know? Okay, so that I can get it right the next time we're not clear. Okay. All right, shall we begin? So I just want to, that is the protocol. Oh, Kevin, by the way, thank you for that. In the future, I guess we have another class next Monday. Are we going to go through the same protocol? Are you going to help?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the same protocol happened in your other classes, although I think in the other classes we may not have Kevin very kindly offering his time to do this. But when we go break out into the seminar sections, we have to do the same thing as maybe your advisors like that. Okay, great. So why don't we get started here? Welcome to APP. Yes, I share that enthusiasm. I think for many of you, there might be some uncertainties and anxieties. I guarantee you this is going to be a fun journey. And I hope this class and the next class really give you a lot more information about the APP, and that certainty will give you hopefully some confidence and a plan to build around. Okay? So we're joined by our other advisors. So let me say hello. We're going to have an introduction a little bit later on, where you get to know a little bit more about the research and their styles, and we talked about section 4 here about the advisor matching. But a quick agenda here. I wanted to briefly go over the overview of the APP, how that's sequenced, kind of mapping out the 4 different courses involved in the APP over the course of this year, and how that maps into the different parts of the APP deliverables that you have. Okay? Can you hear me okay? Okay, good. Then chat about team formations and the project proposals, which are going to be due at the beginning, about 4 p.m. next week, next Monday. Funding opportunities and IRB. These are just things that not all groups this won't be relevant for all groups, okay? But it will be for some of you. And then advisor matching and brief introductions by the advisors. And then perhaps the most helpful thing here is just what that means as far as where you should be now in the APP process, okay? I guarantee you, none of you are behind, okay? We're okay. Where you should be now and kind of immediate steps of the next week and the next like month, okay? Just to get grounded on where you're going in the next few weeks. Sound good? Before jumping into this actual agenda, does anyone have any questions for me? Okay? Okay. Right. You're equally as quiet in person as you are. So now I know it wasn't COVID, it's me. All right. Okay. This is the one goofy, complicated thing about the APP, okay, is that the APP is split up into 4 courses, okay? This is just gonna be like pure administrative background here, but just so that you're not confused when you get your transcript. And so what we're in now is the fall quarter, and that's 298A, okay? It's a 2-credit pass-fail course, okay? And then the second line here just covers the substance of this quarter, which is really to build foundations for your APP and start with early analysis by the time you get to, let's say, December. Okay, so that's 298A. So here's where there's a distinction between your graded credits and your registrar credits. Okay, and so what I mean by that is when you get to winter, this is the bulk of your APP work. Okay, so you will be spending a lot of time on your APP in the winter, and hopefully, you know, by late fall as well. So that is going to be a 4-credit class, and at the end of that quarter, you're going to get what's called an in-progress grade, an IP grade. The reason why you don't get a grade there is because you actually haven't turned in the final report, which doesn't happen until the 3rd week of the spring. So that's when you take a 298C course, also 2 credits. That's just again, the registrar's credits. So when you say, oh, how many credits am I taking this quarter? You're fully listed with the credits listed here. But when you actually get your grade for the report that you turn in that 3rd week of in the spring, you're gonna get a grade, which is gonna be assigned 6 credits, which kind of captures the credits that you got here, okay? So that's how that works, if that makes any sense at all. Okay, and then a big sigh of relief, 3rd week of April, the 3rd week of the quarter, okay, of that spring quarter. You turn in that report, big sigh of relief, big sense of accomplishment. You have a little bit of time you'll get feedback from the readers, main advisor and a second reader. You then move into preparing for the APP presentation, okay, which is really it's both a professional aspect of that, which is you're disseminating information, and a part of that is also a celebratory thing, because it's a big deal. Hopefully by then we'll have an in-person event. I can't promise that right now, I can't promise anything about the future, but that has tended to be both a professional but also a ceremonial event, kind of like a rite of passage, and people's families come, there's your clients who will become like your family, pictures taken, there's sometimes people with balloons and flowers, all that stuff, and it's a really nice event, okay? This is when I get to meet, you know, your loved ones in your life and tell them horrible stories about it's all really fun and awkward at the same time. So, so that concludes APP, okay? And those presentations happen basically the 4th week of May. That's it, we're done. Okay, that's the course. I just in terms of, no, that's all the logistics of it, but now we get to the reasons why I think the APP is so exciting. The APP is one of the first times where you take a lot of independent and control of a project that reflects your policy interests and passions, okay? This is professional work, right? This really isn't like a glorified homework assignment. This is professional work, and it will benefit you tremendously in your future job prospects. And just to give you a little bit more context around that, I've said this to some of you, one-on-one in the small groups, but every student I've worked closely with in the past, every single one has told me how important the APP was in their professional pursuits after leaving this program. And the example is, just say, to give some context, just say you're interested in environmental issues, okay? You apply for an environmental job at an agency, a national agency, what have you. The interviewer asks you, why are you interested in our organization? And you say, I am passionate about environmental issues, sustainability, climate change, all that stuff. Well, that's really great, good for you. So are the 40 other people that they're interviewing that day, being really passionate about environmental issues, okay? It's great to have, but when they ask you, oh, so what are your thoughts about such and such Senate bill, and you can respond to them and say, yes, well, I talked to the stakeholders involved in drafting that report, drafting that bill. I know there's opposition of this person, assembly person such and such said this. Later on, they worked with that stakeholder. There was a lot of support from these folks, but then there was, antagonism from this local group. They thought it was whatever. And you spread so much context and you have knowledge, and you just hit the road running, hit the ground running. Okay, and they're like, okay, this person's a professional already. So you get hired. That story happens all the time. Okay, this is basically like work experience. It's like you work really closely with your clients, stakeholders involved in your APP, ends up being like a really rich experience. So, so I view the APP less about, something to be nervous about, but more something to be excited about, because it's a great opportunity to learn, express your own policy passions. Okay, that's how I view the APP. That's what really energizes me, is to get to know you and your passions and building that out. Does that make sense? Okay, good, I'm excited. Are you excited?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, yes, all right. Are you excited?
Yeah.
All right. All right, we'll get there, yeah.
I just have a question about the other classes for the
Yeah.
spring and winter quarters. Are they in the same structure where we'll have a couple of meetings with the whole group like this, and then the rest of it? will
Great
be
question.
individual?
Yeah, so the structure is this. So this week and next week are the only classes you'll ever have with APP with the full cohort. Okay, on next Monday, you'll turn in your APP proposals and advisor preferences. You then get matched by the end of that week, end of next week. At that point, you're either meeting with your advisors as a group one-on-one, or meeting just with your advisors mini seminar, just like the 4 groups that are being advised by your advisor. We'll call those, I've been struggling with the terminology for this, we'll call them the mini seminar. We get the breakout seminars, okay? That's what they are. So it's only that setting. The only time you'll ever see everyone back together again, okay, is at the APP presentations. No, even then it's broken up into 3 sessions, so no, so this next week's the last time you all see each other. Yeah, it's graduation. Yeah. Yeah, okay, well that's kind of sad thinking of that way.
There'll be fun events during the course of the year, don't worry.
Yes, that's why you're chair. I bring you down, and Professor Gillens brings you back up, yes. Okay, so this is what I'd like to do is just, again, I think we talked a little bit about the overall mindset, okay? This is really about an exciting opportunity, it's professional, but it's also a lot of fun. I certainly have a lot of fun working with you on this over the years. Okay, really, from now on, I don't want you to think about like what makes for the right APP, okay? Like there's no hard and fast rules for the APP, I guarantee you. There's an overall logic to the APP. This is like good analytical work. factors that you might consider, but there's no cookie cutter APP. You don't have to do regression analysis. You don't have to do a survey. Okay, you don't have to have, you know, whatever full-blown cost-benefit analysis with like elasticity. You might not. It completely depends on the nature of your question, the nature of the data available. As long as you're doing the best project within the constraints of your project, you're gonna be in good shape, okay? So this truly is the nature of like professional work, is that you're not meant to do something that's not possible. You're meant to do the best analysis you can provide given the nature of your situation. That is the goal, and I guarantee you're gonna have a great experience. Does that make sense? Is anyone feeling anxious about having to do like full-blown regression analysis and cost-benefit analysis? Are you feeling that way?
Yeah.
You might do that. The thing is, if your project calls for it, it's gonna feel like the natural thing to do. You're gonna want to do it.
Wait, Professor, again, I have a question.
Yes, I did see you.
I know.
I enjoy talking, but go ahead, yes.
So, like, just along that same train of thought, is that kind of what the advisor's for, to kind of be a thought partner in the sense of like, are we doing too much, are we doing too little? Is that something we'll run by our advisor?
Yeah, the only thing is I wouldn't have characterized it as the advisor being to say you're doing too much or too little. It's a very, I don't think they would ever use that judgment like that.
Okay.
It would be more helping you to find what's the most appropriate method, question, and overall framing. And I like that idea of partnership. We're there to bounce ideas off of, and when things go not awry, but where it could be improved and strengthened, given your goals, the advisor's there to help you strengthen it. Yeah. Okay. Again, I want you to just take the foot off of the gas pedal here in terms of expectation on certain types of methods. Okay. In fact, as we'll see in next class, I'll be very explicit about what groups in the past have done and where that's not quite appropriate, because it's always a sense of like a cookie cutter view of the APP. And our goal here is to have something that's effective for your client. No homework, no, this is not that, all right? This is all about your client, professional client, okay? Okay, good. All right, so in terms of the content, like I don't want to spend a lot of time on the APP content today. That's what the next class is all for, okay? But I want to get ahead of the anxieties here, okay? And to just plant seeds, as we did at the end of last year, which is say, well, what is the APP? And again, there's no cookie cutter like formulation for the APP, but there is a consistent logical framework for thinking about policy analysis, okay? And really, it's just these three buckets, okay, with some nuances for every particular case. One is you want to establish the goals of your client. You want to motivate your project. Why is this issue important? And it ends up leading to the goals of your client and the specific questions that they have. And by question, almost always it will be about how do they best achieve an organizational goal. Not was this program effective? That's like impact analysis, right? Not a treatise on critical theory. Those might go into background and motivate your work. This is about nonprofit agency consulting. They have a goal, they don't know how to get there, you're helping them get there. Does that make sense from a framing of a question standpoint? That's the nature of the questions that you're going to be asking. Okay. You'll then do analysis to really understand what the kind of core problems that the agency is facing, what opportunities they have, okay? So what I like to view that as, you're gonna do a lot of research, you're gonna get a whole bunch of data. Your job really is to synthesize that data to create insights, okay? That's actually the part that is difficult. but that's the fun part, okay? So you wanna take all this data, interview, like feedback and data analysis, and you like synthesizing that to understand and present insights about problems, opportunities your clients face. That should then naturally lead towards policy options, okay? Like the natural extension of that like understanding of like problems and opportunities they face, or what are the things that solve those problems, and what are the ways that avail themselves of those opportunities. Whatever the goals are of that organization. So you'll end that chapter with a list of like policy options. And then you have a whole other section of your APP that has its own types of methodology, separate from the methodology used here, to do the policy evaluations. Comparing policy options, okay, understanding what the priorities and constraints that the organization faces, and balancing all of those competing interests, identify a set of policies that are feasible and effective for your client. Okay, does that make sense? So there's kind of two sets of methodologies, one for data collection analysis and one for the policy evaluation. And those are distinct in some sense, but they inform each other naturally. Okay, really that's all I wanted to say about the APP substance. Within this, as you'll see, have I noted anything about any particular method? Did I say, oh, you have to estimate a demand elasticity or a specific type of cost-benefit analysis approach? No, right? We're good? How you actually implement these different sections will ultimately come down to what data is available, the nature of the questions being asked, and various priorities and constraints that your client faces in this real world. Okay? That's what dictates the methods. Okay? Everyone here is fully able to implement, you have the ability to implement any one of these methods that are going to be appropriate. Okay? So don't worry about that part. Are we good? All right. And then all of next class will be devoted to basically bullet, these bullets, okay? And a discussion of different types of methodologies you could use, okay? All right, yes, we will discuss more in 10-4. Resources, okay, the APP handbook, which I've already posted on CCLE, okay, that is a really great go-to resource. All right. It discusses everything from attributes of a good client to a good question, the nature of an appropriate APP question. It also goes into like norms and expectations of interacting with your client and interacting with each other. Yeah. And then it also then goes into like formatting and expectations of like the organization of your APP report. Okay, and really it just reiterates kind of like the broader logic with a little bit more detail. But again, it's really hands off when it comes to specifics, and that really is dictated by your project. Okay. Okay. So you might also, well, in general, your advisor is also a resource and partner for you, and a support system, okay? You're gonna come across a lot of questions about strategy. Which direction should I go? Should we pursue this type of analysis? Should we pursue this type of question? Is it appropriate to broaden the question when the client wants something very narrow? Or vice versa, they want something broad and you have to corral them into something more narrow. How do you negotiate that? How do you think about that? The advisor's there to support you on that and think through that, okay? There's also issues of, my client isn't responsive. My client disrespected me. My client wants too much of me. Could be anything, all right? Again, this is a professional environment, you'll handle that, but to the extent that you need support on that, it's also something that your advisor is there for you for, okay? There might be interpersonal issues, within the group, okay? It happens even among really, really well-meaning, kind people, okay? So again, it's, you know, the team's responsibility to handle those things, but the advisor is also someone you can reach out to talk through that in a really balanced, fair, open, and encouraging way, okay? All right, so those are all resources for you. Likewise, Kevin, who you all know well, Kevin is here, is just an amazing and a compassionate human being. And if you have issues that you feel more comfortable reaching out to Kevin for, by all means, he's a resource. Okay. And actually, I wanted to point you to mental health supports, university level. You know, given the stresses that we've been through, I just want to let you know that you can always, of course, feel free to, you know, reach out to your advisor, reach out to Kevin, reach out to your friends. There's just never any judgment within any interactions that you have with me, and you know, we're just here to support you. So if you're feeling the need for any support, or you feel like you're struggling, it's okay. We all struggle. Please reach out. Yeah.
Maybe say a little bit about the APP handbook, how it's built on best practices for the use.
Yes. Yes.
So sort of emphasize that it's, you know, sort of lessons we've learned.
Yeah. So
We didn't pull it out of thin air.
we certainly did not pull it out of thin air. The APP handbook that you're seeing now looks completely different. Not completely, well, it looks a lot different from what it looked like 7, 8 years ago. It's an evolving document. And it evolves based on experiences from groups every year. And I believe it's a much stronger, relevant document now than it was years ago, and it constantly improves. But it is based on our experiences from previous groups. And have you taken a look at it? Who hasn't taken? I'm kidding. But if you read it, you'll note that it's a lot of guidance. It's not instructive. It's offering a set of guidance and principles, and the rationale for that. Okay, so that the tone of it is to give you, just as Professor Key mentioned, best practices and guidelines for that. Okay. Yeah. Great. Thank you. All right. We are ready to move on. The fun part. Team formations and team dynamics. I want to focus. Yes, please.
I'm sorry,
Find it
a
out.
question kind of, the first section.
Yeah.
So, I know obviously things are, you know, moving forward with COVID and stuff like that, there still are some restrictions.
There still are.
There still is some restrictions going on, like in some meetings with, clients, how they're on stuff and how they're moving forward with COVID and whatnot. What are some of like, I know obviously you can't tell us exactly, but what are some of the things you think we should expect, like with clients and like how, like is, do you perceive COVID being as an issue, like if we get some lockdown, like is that something that we can then change or?
Yeah. So that's a great question. I'll put it this way. The APP schedule that you are experiencing, which is outlined in the syllabi, particularly in the winter to spring, where you have weekly discussion topics, weekly deliverables, all leading toward the development of various chapters, which then you combine at the end of the quarter in the winter. That entire timeline is about 4 weeks longer than it had been prior to COVID. And so one of the big motivations that we had to like build out that new schedule was precisely because that cohort dealt with COVID in that way. We also, so what I'm gonna say is, what I'm gonna first address is how we've accommodated the schedule to acknowledge those challenges, but also what you might encounter when you're interfacing with stakeholders and your client. Okay, so just first part still. So it's this extended timeline. There's also a we are also more conscious of the types of things that require interactions with clients in the early data collection. So there's it's much more careful and a demarcated list of schedule of deliverables when it comes to the problems and opportunities. That really takes a lot of interfacing with your clients and data analysis. So that's made a little bit more explicit, and that part is like expanded out some. Okay. What you'll face with clients, I actually think that this year, my impression is that things are getting a lot better than what they were, not last year, but what are we? This is 2021, 2020. Yeah, last year's class.
All of which were bad last year.
Last year was our only APP in remote. Yeah, I think they had a challenge because they hit their APP interviewing just as things were getting pretty bad. No, the year before also faced this too, when they were completing.
When they were completing.
When they're completing it, yeah. But a lot of them were still interviewing then. So they also had a very difficult time. So here's the thing. In the same way that interfacing in person has a lot of advantages, and then when we were on Zoom last year, that, in my opinion, was a big disadvantage because we can't talk, we can't have those side conversations and share a lot of the side information that ends up really thickening knowledge and relationships, you know? The same thing, you'll face those disadvantages when you have Zoom calls. And that's just a challenge that we all are facing. But I think it's definitely better now since there is the opportunity to meet in person. But to be frank, many of you wouldn't have clients locally anyways, and you'd be doing things at a distance anyways. A lot of clients that are based all across the US, international, so, I mean, that's just par for the course. Yeah. Okay, ready. Okay. Okay, so, I mentioned this last week. At this point, you should have your team. Okay, you should have your team at this point, or really be close to finalizing it. Does that make sense? Okay. Your team should be 4 or 5 people. Okay. If you're not in a team of 4 or 5, I think that you should have a conversation with me and Kevin about scope for combining, splitting. It all depends on the nature, how strong, you know, your client and those relationships are. But it's a bit untenable if we have a lot of groups, then the advisors aren't going to be able to give you the time and quality of support that really is needed. Okay. The whole point is that we have, you know, the right number of teams for advisors so that there's just sufficient support. Okay, so that QCing is really important. So that's where that comes from. 4 and 5, like that's a good group size. Okay, 3 can work too, but again, it has to be in a really special case. And I would strongly dissuade that this year. 5. A couple of you reached out and asked me if I am in a group of 5, am I held to a higher bar? Is anyone worried about this issue? Yeah, the answer is no. You're not held to a higher bar. In my experience, okay, groups that you wanna, and I'll get to this, one of the most important things about a group is that you have complementary skill sets. Okay. So you don't want to have all group members be good at the very same thing. Like, oh, we are great with client relations, and all 5 of you are great with client relations, and you don't feel as comfortable doing analytical work or interviewing. That doesn't make for a successful group. You guys might have a great time with your commonalities, having drinks later, but you know, we need complementary skill sets to be productive here. Okay, so that's an important thing to keep in mind. Other things to keep in mind are having very clear about workflow and work habit expectations. Okay, almost every team conflict that I've experienced as an advisor has been there being different views on the timing of when people get work done and the quality of that work. Some people are great about doing things at the last minute, and that just drives another team member bananas. Okay, because things aren't communicated well, things are people waiting for each other, those things become really problematic. So it's really important to be really clear about these things and also find people who you trust to be clear about these things. Okay? How does that relate to a team of 4 or 5? Well, you have a lot of people in a group, okay, coordinating those things become a little bit more difficult. So just be mindful of that, and it's really important to set those expectations clearly. Okay. All right. One thing that I'll mention, this is like advisor pro tip. All right. All that stuff was just general stuff. I think it makes sense. This is like also in workflow. Okay. What often happens is person A does interviewing, person B writes up that section, person C interfaces with client, person D does this. You don't talk to each other. When you come back and you all write your different sections of the draft, it reads like a medley of disjointed things. Things are repeated, there's no insight, it's just like a collection of random facts. It happens all the time. There's an optimal level of, there's a constant communication that happens between your team members where you all know why you're doing things, you come back together, you guys specialize in the effort, but you always come back together to synthesize that information. So everyone has a common knowledge, and that then affects what they do next and what section they write, so on and so forth. There's a community knowledge that happens that's just called good teamwork. What you don't want is everyone does everything. That also isn't good either. So there's a Goldilocks point right in between, where you specialize but always come back. Specialize and come back. Specialize in the effort, I'm saying. And you come back and share that knowledge and development, what you learn, you discussion, you come to some shared understanding. That then dictates the next step as a group. All right? That's called working together. But that's a very specific realization of it, which I've seen doesn't always happen. I've seen both ends of this distribution here. Okay? All right. All right. Pro tip number 2. This again is just be very general about. I don't know if you're familiar with nonviolent communication. Anyone familiar with that term? Okay, I know the social welfare folks might. If there's some disagreement, please don't make assumptions about each other's person or their intentions. You don't know that. Okay, talk to them about your perspective, your needs. Do that in a professional way. Likewise, say positive things to support each other. Okay. I guarantee you that'll be a much more effective way to get through and build something together. Okay. Happy to talk about this much more. It's something that's near and dear to me. Okay. So. All right. Typical challenges. I kind of went through that on the positive side. But again, a lot of these things can be addressed with clear communications to begin with. And also, when things are challenged, is to just address it in a really professional, positive, non-judgmental way. All right. Doing this effectively, working together effectively, your clients are really aware, sharp people. They'll see dysfunction. They'll see this is a professional setting. It bears on the success of your APP and your reputation. So it's really important to be professional and excellent as best as you can. Okay. All right. So in terms of the group formation, coming back to that, who's in a group of 4 or 5 right now? Okay. Those of you who did not raise your hand, and those of you who did not raise your hand viewing from remotely, please do reach out to me and Kevin, okay? Because we'll need to have a conversation about if that's okay and whether or not, it'll be helpful to join other groups, okay? For those of you who are in a group of 4, also be open to accepting a new person in, okay, in case that's something that makes the overall APP experience a good one, okay? All right. Kevin, we should probably touch base about this, yeah. So those of you in a group of 3, or sorry, those of you who aren't in a group of 4 or 5, I ask that you please just reach out to me and Kevin like after this class, and then we'll start talking. Okay? Any questions? Yes.
I guess I'm curious, you know, I don't know what people are, especially on clients, like on the syllabus it says you should like have a client, the client was accepted us by next Monday. And that seems pretty quick, from all hyperpage, so I'm just wondering.
Yeah.
I think about that.
So on the, where did I put this? Somewhere on some note sheet, it's the note that your client next week is tentative at this point. Okay. I would view that as, so over the next, let me see, you're going to be submitting your client, your proposal next week. At this point, what I would like you to have, okay, is either a very clear idea of who your client is, and that relationship might already be well formed. And if not that, have a list of 2 or 3 possible clients that you have been in touch with, as well as the question that they're interested in, and some knowledge about their responsiveness as a client, their willingness to be partners with you on this, i.e., are they gonna, you know, hook you up with either stakeholders to interview and data, et cetera. What you'll do is that when you go talk to your advisor, right, one of the very first thing that you'll do is discuss which of these potential possibilities are most viable. That'll be a discussion about the reliability of the client. Are they gonna just fall through? A lot of them do. You don't want that to happen in like February. It's happened. Okay. And so good conversations about that with your advisor will avoid issues like that. Really. Okay? Like there's just certain signals that happen where like this is not a reliable client. Okay. Those conversations also lead to, well, yes, you might like this client better, that question is not appropriate for APP, or it doesn't reflect many of your interests. They refuse to broaden it out, or whatever. This question, although it's not the client you like, actually makes for a really great APP in terms of its impact, its timeliness for social issues, et cetera, okay? You'll have that discussion with your advisor. So, and it might end up being different than the client and the question you put down on the proposal, and that's okay. So for that proposal, just put your best guess tentative question in anything client. Does that make sense? Okay. So it's over this next month that you really start to hone in on the right client and the question. And once that's kind of set, you set out a work plan, and then you'll feel like the APP is you have the roadmap in front of you. My hunch is that a lot of to the extent that you have any anxieties about this, is that once you have your client and your question, like you'll feel a lot better about this process. Is that possibly true? Yeah. Okay. Did that address your question? Do you have any follow-up question?
I can ask a follow-up question. I guess, how should we think about, is there any concern about like us competing for clients among each other, or with like similar groups in other universities, other programs, like that?
Yeah, so there's definitely kind of like a Game of Thrones, you know, feeling about the APP. Now, so some of you actually might be talking to the same clients, is that right?
I don't know what I'm
You're just a troublemaker. So I'll put it this way, like, to the extent that, you know, some of you are talking to the same client, you might have, okay, put it this way, from your perspective, if you have several clients that you're considering, your advisor will then help you choose the one that's most appropriate for you. We'll be aware if there's two groups working with the same client. That's okay, so long as the questions are fairly distinct. Okay. Now, if some of you have very similar questions with two different clients, that's quite fantastic. Okay. You may feel a little bit of competition from the other group. Welcome to the real world. It's fine. You can also learn from each other, which is also welcome to the real. That also happens. So I would view that as highly collaborative. Okay. There's no real sense are you competing against each other in any real sense. Okay, it'll maybe in an imagined and egotistical way, which is perfectly fine for you to like have, but not in any real sense from this university. Does that make sense? Okay. Oftentimes we've had two groups working on very similar questions with completely different clients, and what's created is just very different and also just uniquely insightful. So that's what we've seen in the past. Good. Okay. All right. I want to make sure. So that actually leads. Let's just jump to the advisors now. So part of your proposal, okay, is to list in rank order the advisor of your choosing. Okay. There's a better than odds chance that you won't get your first choice advisor. Okay, I'll just say that. But what we do try to do is, you know, match advisors to groups based on, you know, a higher preference, one of your higher, more preferred advisors. Okay, so we do try to do that. Every advisor can advise any project. Okay, and the reason why is the advice tends to be like analytical and professional strategy, and it's really not about subject matter expertise. Like, and you really don't want your advisor to be like, you know, the person that's the one person you rely on with subject matter expertise. Like, if you're relying on your advisors for that, then it really shows how limited you are in all the stakeholder interviews that you're conducting. Like, that really is the bulk of it, right? So think of your advisor as a generalist, okay? And your advisor is for sure going to be super interested in, you know, the work that you're doing. Okay, so, and like in the past, every, like, you know, award-winning project has been advised by every single one of the advisors. So they're all just really tremendous. Yes?
I'm sorry, I have two small questions.
Yeah, sure.
The first thing is, from our advisors, can we get like, is it possible that we can see like what type of APP project they prefer or like their interest, so we can kind of try to like, if we like have a taking class with, for example, if we already had like a project with.
Yes.
their children.
So we're going to do that right now.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yes.
I'm
We're-
sorry, I did not do that.
No.
But then also, I wanted to ask, I apologize if you already discussed it, but what are like the honor winners? Like, what do you win? Like, what is that?
You win honors. Yeah.
How do you win?
You know, the answer to that is you write a really good APP. Yeah. So what ends up happening is that when you turn in your APP, it gets evaluated and you get feedback on it. The advisors get together and say, you know what, this one really stood out to me. Compared to this year, compared to past years, this one was just had a level of excellence that really communicated to us and the audience. And then we'll get together, and then there are going to be ones that just stand out, and we want to acknowledge them. That's it.
No physical prizes or cash prizes.
No, yeah.
The bragging rights.
Yeah, we don't need to brag, right? We hold it inside as a sense of accomplishment, and then troll your, you know, teammates that you won and the others didn't. Yeah.
One thing to point out is that there's not like some set number of APPs that get honors. you know, and so it's not like, you know, a competition in that sense. So it's really just a way for the department to acknowledge really exceptional work.
Right, there's no set numbers. It's not like 1, 2, 3 or anything. There's no top award. It's kind of like a standard. You cross it just clearly, then we want to just distinguish that APP for that year. Yeah.
And non-honors APPs still can get incredibly good grades as well.
Yeah.
So it's not as if doing solid work doesn't get you a good grade potentially in the class as well. So
You
it's
get the
not-
love and admiration of your advisor and your colleagues and your future employers. All that is there. Yeah.
The other thing to point out is that the APPs from past years which have gotten honors are, at least most of them, I think, maybe all of them, are on the department's website. And so that can be a really good resource for like looking at like what are some different models that have been used in the past, finding something that either sort of substantively or in terms of its structure or question it would address is similar to what you're doing. So, so honors is also helpful in kind of guiding you toward, you know, kind of that standout work from past
Yeah.
cohorts.
And I guarantee you your advisor will do the following as you're kind of thinking through how to approach some sort of cost benefit analysis, some policy evaluation or survey. They'll say, oh, you know, your project, there's a project 2 years ago that reminds us of, you know, yours right now. You might want to look at that one as a reference for that section. So it ends up being like advisors and then this repository of past APPs, not just the awards winner. Like you can reach out to Kevin. Kevin will give you access to all the APPs. But it ends up becoming, it's a repository of past examples. Even every project has some aspect of it that could be used as a good model for a particular thing. So your advisors have this living memory of that. Okay, so so you had asked what type of APPs have advisors advised. They've advised every type of APP. Every advisor has advised every type of APP. I've advised, so when we did have top, I was the advisor for the top honors winner one year. That project was 99% qualitative, right? I know that may come as a surprise since I taught 208, but it was a great experience, and it was a very good relationship, and that team just did a marvelous job, and it was just all qualitative. Okay, and they won the top honor. So that says two things. One, what you were exposed to from your advisor as a professor and what they're able to advise are just independent of each other. And two, your APP doesn't have to be the full-blown quantitative analysis to be the best project that, you know, that we've seen. You know, it can be any method. It's the quality and the rigor that matter. Does that make sense? Cool. Okay, so having said that, why don't we have a brief introduction from our advisors? Advisors, if you wouldn't mind just sharing a bit about, I guess, your own work, but really less about your own work, but more about how you like to work with your clients, if there's anything particular you want to say about that. So we'll just go this one. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey everybody, Professor Starnes Frelkout. I think you all know me. I'll work with anybody, any methods, just like Professor Yen said, and of course it doesn't have to be about social movements or protests or anything like that. You know, my style tends to be more backseat driver. I'm going to let you all establish meeting cadences, but anytime you reach out to me with questions, I'll respond promptly. I very much believe in not letting my inbox get full. So I can be as hands-on or passive as you desires. That's good.
Hi everybody, I'm Randall Akey. I do work on inequality, I've done some work on immigration, economic development, the labor markets, but I've advised, again, things from healthcare to court systems and public transportation, things that I've never done any personal work on myself. So again, it really is this sort of, we are all able to broadly help advise. And, in some ways I feel like Zach, as on sort of, as hands-on as people need to be. And I also agree with the point, Professor, you mentioned earlier that, yeah, you really want a group that's 4 to 5. Don't try, that's again one of those best practices that we've all experienced. Because 3, it falls onto two, the work falls onto two people, and you're gonna still have, final exam, midterms, and all these other classes, accumulating. 4 is good, 5 is also good. 6 becomes too cumbersome for everybody. You can't even find a time to meet, for instance, that works for everyone anyway, with your advisor as well as yourselves. So anyway, all of that to say that, again, there are lots of best practices, and I'm happy to advise. I'm mostly a quantitative person, but I also sit in a qualitative department, which is American Indian Studies, so I'm appointed in both. So I'm very familiar with all kinds of stuff that others aren't necessarily. Ethnographic interviews and things. Not that you guys will be doing that, probably not. But I'm definitely open to all of that stuff too, as we all are. So yeah, I think the best, there's a lot of great advice in the APP book and handbook, but I think I guess that's all I got to say.
Great.
Hi, I'm Marty Dillons, and I enjoy teaching, but I really enjoy advising APPs, and the reason is that it's just like a terrific process of, over a long period of time, like building something, as a group, right? I participate, you're doing the building, but there's this like real sense of accomplishment that, figuring out, exactly what the question is and how you're going to address it, and then working through, the sort of technical and logistical issues, and it comes together, and it's a very satisfying process, not without, elements of tension and, fraughtness and, challenges, but that's part of what makes it so satisfying in the end to do. So I look forward to working with whichever groups of you I end up working with. In the past, I've advised APPs with a wide range of clients, with government agencies, with nonprofits, local nonprofits, international nonprofits, on a wide range of topics. My own work is, I'm a political scientist. My own work focuses on race and inequality and sort of the dysfunctions of American government. But the APPs that I've advised have, like, at best, sort of tangentially related to those kind of topics. My work's also quantitative for the most part, but again, the APPs I've advised have used all sorts of methods. They've all used like interviews, especially stakeholder interviews. They've all used some form of document analysis, often from looking at like what sort of similar agencies or nonprofits or programs have done to sort of try to get ideas for different sort of policy options. Some have used existing survey data. I do teach a class on survey analysis. So if you know that your APP is going to involve analyzing survey data or collecting survey data, think of me. I did advise an APP that did a kind of original survey of, in this case it was community-based organizations, to try to assess what some of the challenges they were facing were. Geographic analysis, sort of spatial analysis, all kinds of different methods. What else to say? My approach is to offer you like guidance and support, not so much to tell you what to do. I think if you're really going off the rails, I'm not going to be shy. I'll let you know, like that's a bad idea. But I think it's really like your project, and I'm there as a resource. I will emphasize what Professor Yin and others have already suggested, which is that the subject matter of your APPs, you should not only rely on your advisor. We have in both the department and the Luskin School such a broad range of faculty with expertise in a wide range of different substantive areas. And for sort of specific advice and questions and suggestions on the literature, like, going to other faculty can be very helpful. And that's also something that your advisor can help you to identify, like who you might want to ask, for help on particular aspects of your APPs. The two things that I will emphasize for everybody, but certainly for my groups, is that as early as possible, you develop a really clear understanding of like what is exactly the question or the problem that your APP is going to address. That does take some time. For some groups, it's like there at the beginning, you've got like a client that's very clear and you're very clear, that's terrific. A lot of times it's kind of a process, but it's a really important part of the process, and so I really emphasize, trying to focus on that and not sort of launch your work without having like a very clear sense of where you're going and how you're going to get there. I guess the other thing that I will emphasize with my groups, and I'll just put it out there now with you, is that having a clarity with your client is also really important, right? So that you want to make sure that your expectations of the kind of access you'll have, the information that your client's going to be providing, about their organization that you make use of, everybody needs to be on the same page. So I guess I'd say those are the two things that, as an advisor, I'm going to be kind of focusing on in the first, weeks of working together. So I think that's it. Oh, I guess I'd also say I really hope that I'll be able to meet with my APP groups in person. Not necessarily every meeting, but at least periodically. I'm really tired of like sitting in front of my computer and staring at little boxes. So it doesn't mean we can't use Zoom, but if you're like really hoping you'll be like on, Zoom for all these meetings, find somebody else to buy.
Well, likewise, I hope to be meeting you in person, at least in the beginning of the quarter, so we can, interface in person, and then, afterwards, as needed, we can meet remotely. So I think you're all familiar with me. I'd say that my APP style is the following. I like to give feedback to written documents digitally, so it's just easier to keep track of like the bigger points that I want to convey. I feel like that's a lot clearer than just sitting in the meeting and it's giving a whole bunch of things, and it's really hard to like write down and talk through in a short amount of time. But I do like to use the meetings to follow up on those very points. Okay. My comments will generally be, again, big picture. It's about structure, organization, where the logical flow is failing, where it could be improved, it could be strengthened. Basically to give you guidance on how to just strengthen the arguments that you're making, the end analysis that you're doing. When we do meet in person, what's really helpful for me is that, we talk about those points that I raised, but then you bring new questions about the next steps, like what are the challenges that you're facing, and be ready to talk about those, because then we can just address them really quickly. Move on so I understand what the situations are, and I can provide feedback to help you address them. And then what I like to do also is that any decision point that you have is to also think through what's the kind of downstream implications of that are, so you kind of just have a full view of kind of like the implications of the decisions you're making, okay? But the immediate ones and the things that you might not see just yet. Lastly, I'll say this. Kind of a fun part, and I like to do this, is you're gonna face challenges in your APP that's gonna require you to be flexible to pivot. These are uncomfortable things to do because you have in mind something you're really committed to. Invariably, you're gonna have to pivot. I am good at trying to get you to be on board with a pivot that's gonna ultimately lead you to be successful, okay? And that's a little bit of a analytical process. It's also a little bit of an emotional process because a lot of you are gonna be really committed to what you have in mind, and that's just not, it's gonna lead to a dead end because of things out of your control. It's really important to know how to pivot and to do that effectively, so that you can, have a successful project. And that's always the fun part of the APP too, even if it's a little bit challenging. Okay, so that's me in a nutshell. Okay, so let's come back to any questions about that? Yes.
Yeah, actually, cause I know you and Abigail will sort of just recommend to what is your like ideal group or ideal working style. I was wondering how designers work with the one that also kind of
Great.
Yeah, thank you.
Question.
You know, honestly, I think it's the same as Professor Carolyn and Yan. You know, my feedback is going to be kind of, you know, big picture type items. How do I get the best from my clients? How do I deal with a cumbersome client? What is possibly the right analytical strategy for this part of the project? How should we split labor between our group and the division of labor within the group? I really like like frequent check-ins. Let's say that is, you know, giving small bits of feedback, you know, once a week as opposed to getting something dumped on me, you know, once a month that I then have to spend hours looking at, and if you have to wait longer to get feedback from me. Much more of a kind of do things step by step, iteratively, as opposed to in big chunks of time. So that both goes with how I like to interact with people as well as how I do work and give feedback on work. Sophia, do you want more details?
That's perfect as well as like what's your ideal group like? What's like I know that's hard to say.
You're all my ideal group.
Like ideal group
Yeah.
working style. Besides like I know you expanded on like frequent check-ins, but what about like communication styles?
Yeah, well, you're my PA, you probably know my
Yeah.
communication styles. Like, I think I'm probably pretty communicative, maybe even a little, I don't wanna say overactive on email, maybe. I think I do email a lot. I try to respond to email quickly, so I do sometimes get frustrated if I feel like anyone, not just students, you know, colleagues, editors, whatever, anyone, you know, I take it personally if I'm not getting responses to email. So you can expect frequent emails from me, and I would hope to have responses from you within 24 hours, but certainly no more than 48 hours, excepting weekends. I do believe in work-life balance, and I'm perfectly happy if people don't work Saturdays and Sundays. I try to take these one day off. Ideally, too, that doesn't really happen in the teaching quarter. So you're all going to be great if you choose to work with me. I worked with qualitative only groups in the past, and I've worked with very quantitative groups, but certainly communication and organization are what I care about the most.
I like the most disorganized groups, company, you know, the ones who
We
don't
welcome
care.
that.
I don't know who's gonna say that was just a joke. Yeah, no, I mean, I think, you know, there's a lot of similarity. I'm maybe a little bit less communicative. I prefer, you know, sort of bunching a little bit of your concerns and let's chat. You know, send me something in advance and then let's chat at the end of the week. Generally, that sort of has worked really well, in the sense of, you know, you go through your week, you have a problem with your client, they're not communicating with you, or yeah, they just disappeared, and now you're sort of at this breaking point, and you don't know what to do, and so, you know, you've got that problem, and you've got this other problem, and then we talk at the end of the week, and we come up with solutions. So yeah, I prefer to sort of bunch them, but not monthly, definitely not monthly, but, you know, weekly, and you know, sort of, and if it's something written, of course, it's much nicer to have that in hand, especially if you really are questioning the direction you're going. So, yeah, it's hard, I mean, everything everybody said, absolutely, we all want, you know.
We're all interchangeable.
Yeah, we really are, it's hard to, you know, argue in favor of anything.
Yeah, kind of. I was hoping for like users, like communication styles, and what you're looking for in the group to help maybe.
Well, I think that it is helpful to, I mean, I don't think we like differ that much in terms of what we expect. I think the expectations are, like, you work hard, you try your best, you strive for excellence, and you're communicative.
Yeah.
I think that's what we all want.
I think, from my perspective, I think Joe would agree, what can be frustrating is if if we're meeting with the APP groups and it doesn't appear like progress has been made, you know, at least every 2 weeks, I would say. Now, you know, you're gonna hit roadblocks, but then you can kind of go around the roadblock and make progress on another part of your project. You hit a roadblock and you start ameliorating that, you work towards overcoming that roadblock, and then we talk about that in our meeting. But sometimes, especially early on, you know, April feels so far away that it's very easy to be a bit relaxed at the beginning, and that's when March and April become really difficult and not fun for the APP group. So I guess if I have one pet peeve, it is if it feels like progress is not constantly being made, with the understanding that it's gonna go at different paces and things are gonna come up. That's part of the nature of the process.
Okay, so based on that, submit your advisor rankings next week. Listen, if you have any more questions about advisors, you know, feel free to reach out to them. You know, one thing I'll note is that in past years, I think I would have already talked to about 3 groups over the summer, and I think that's probably the experience shared by the other advisors. I think this past year, I mean this not as in any judgment way, but just a reflection of the conditions and the larger COVID environment that we've been in. I haven't talked to any group, and I feel a little blind by, you know, what's going on. So if you see my pleading eyes, it's because I'm trying to gather information with my fern antenna of like what's going on and reaching out to Kevin, saying what's going on with the cohort. You know, we do want to know. We want to kind of, you know, be in advance of any issues or questions that you have, and we haven't had that yet. So you have another week or 2 before assignments are made. You know, reach out to an advisor just to chat about where your work is going. Okay, we welcome that. I'm meeting with a couple of you because I made this announcement last week, and a few groups reached out, which is great. Okay, we just very much welcome that. Okay. All right. So we don't have much left. I just want to kind of like move through this material pretty quickly. There's funding sources. There's funding sources available to you. Not all groups need funding, but some groups may need funding. What this funding can be good for is data collection, travel to do interviews. If you're going to do like a small survey, you want to pay respondents a survey fee. Those are all things that can be used with this funding. And then we have several organizations on campus that'll, you know, have a competitive funding pool. For the first time, public policy now has a funding source for APP specifically. And there's a due date for that, December 5th, okay? It's just a 1-page proposal. Basically, simply it's just, what is your project, what are your needs, what's the funding needs, just itemized, okay? And that's it, yes.
Do you know, would that fund go through like our financial aid, or would it be like a grant paid out?
I think is you have a set amount, and then from that you like submit receipts, and it just be withdrawn from that account. The money never just comes to a group; it's just by receipt and reimbursement. Reimbursement, is that right? I don't know. To be honest, let me
I
hear.
can answer that.
Yes, thank you.
So it will always go towards your brewing bill. So it won't go directly to your personal account, it will go to your brewing bill.
It goes through what?
Brewing bill, the bar account.
I see. I'm sorry. Does that mean the students have to have outlays first themselves, or?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. Good. Good.
Yeah, so
Okay.
you don't have
That's
to
important.
necessarily upfront the money, but it will operate kind of like a PSP.
Thank you.
It'll still do your, so you'll probably get a bit if you can.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Right, thank you for that. 3 other Luskin affiliate, yes.
Sorry, so is that like per group, or like it goes to like individual, like there's?
No, for the group, The group applies, and then the awards are made to the group.
But then it's just divided through and then goes through your room bill for each individual member of the group?
Yeah, so it will be only to one person in the group.
so that person would manage it for the group.
Yeah.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
so it's like specified on the application, who they will.
Yes, so the person submitting the application will be the person that we're gonna distribute
Okay.
What, I have a question along that line. So, but what if 3 people need transport reimbursement? Does the one person who's on the grant have to pay for the transit for those 3 people so that one person gets reimbursed? This may be stuff we can figure out later, but.
Well, I'm not the person to answer this.
Stuff that we can figure out later and discuss further,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
But ideally, we'll go towards one person. It can get a little complicated if it goes to multiple people.
Wait, so, it seems like the reimbursement method would work pretty well, right? It just, the group has costs and,
Yeah.
but that has outlay. You know what, I'm gonna stop talking about that, we'll figure it out, okay?
I mean, it could work, it's just that people have to upfront the money.
That's why I backed off of that, because, yeah, I can't take that for granted. Let's, commit to solving this, so it ends up being like a, you know, a practical, like, operational system, but we do have funding available. Not all groups need it. If you're planning on applying for this thing, talk to your advisor first, okay? Talk through the needs. This is only gonna happen after you've already developed a work plan, because the work plan will then showcase the types of data you're collecting. If there's no need for it, your advisor should not support it. We wanna make sure this money goes to the groups that need it, because we all have different needs in the projects, okay?
That's what I was gonna say, reiterate the fact that we have a budget constraint, we don't have unlimited.
Yeah, and not everyone's gonna get it, and we don't have enough for that. But if you need it, we're gonna, you know, and the proposal's well written and it makes sense, of course, we're gonna support it, so. Yeah.
And I will also add that in past years, there has been money in some of the institutes that hasn't gotten claimed. So
Yeah.
don't feel like, you know, it's gonna be really hard, or you have to get in really early, else all the money will be gone. It does seem like that, given the past levels of requests, like money is around to support the
Yeah.
work.
Yeah, and I think, talk to your advisor about it, because, yeah, these other groups, these 3 have traditionally funded APP, projects. And so, so I think the Institute of Inequality and Democracy has it this year, at least it's still on their website. I'm not sure about these 2, but they often have, supported projects. If you need funding, you can just, you know, convert that same application to both of them, and then, you know, take their money, and then you can save our money for like a party or something. I'm kidding, you know, we just wanna make sure that you're supported, so. Anyways, there are these other sources, and talk to your advisor about them, and see if it's appropriate, see if their needs are there. And then, your advisor, they'll reach out to your advisor too, just for recommendation, and, you know, so there has to be that support to begin with, so have that communication. Okay, that's great. IRB, by and large, you do not need IRB approval for your project, okay? And why I say that is because if the nature of your project is to do work for a course or for a academic-based consulting project, such as a capstone, you actually don't need human subjects approval for your project. If your intention from the beginning really is, oh, I do want to publish this possibly in an academic journal, that changes everything. That motivation, that intention may trigger the need for an IRB approval, and it's good to have that conversation with your advisor ahead of time about that. That requires a little bit of legwork, preparing an IRB proposal. Your advisor has to be actively involved. It has to go through your advisor. I've done it in my 6 years of doing this. I think I've had 2 projects that needed IRB approval. Okay, one of them actually didn't need it. They just wanted the option value of perhaps publishing something academically, which they didn't do, which is fine, but they ended up publishing a really good piece as a white paper, okay, which didn't require IRB approval. So have that conversation early on, okay. Now, the other group that got it, they also technically didn't need it, but they were doing a survey and they asked questions about undocumented status, something sensitive. Just out of due diligence, they just felt they were more comfortable doing that. They actually didn't need to do it either. Okay, so by and large, you won't need this, but have a conversation with an advisor about type of project and your goals for it, and it might be a good thing to do. Okay.
one thing to add, is maybe we'll talk about more next week, is that even if you don't need IRB approval, you do need to be aware if you're dealing with vulnerable populations of like the procedures to ensure that, you know, no harm comes to the subjects or the participants in your study. So that might have to do with things like what kind of information you're reporting, whether they can be identified from the information that you've written down or recorded in some other way, or certain questions that you may not want to ask because you would have certain obligations if you got particular answers and things like that. So that is something to keep in touch with your advisors about.
Yeah, that's an incredibly important point. IRB and proper protocols for human subjects protection in terms of confidentiality and other risks, privacy and confidentiality, like those are two separate things. You always have to maintain confidentiality and privacy. That also means proper consent. There's consent forms. That language, in the best place to draw resources for how to structure that is the IRB materials. So essentially, you're just doing what the IRB would require you to do for approvals, but you're just not going through the process. So, yes, we have a very, very high standard for human subject protections. Yeah.
Actually, that just brought up a question. Anyone said you should maybe not ask questions that you don't want an answer to. Like, if you're a TA, I know that you're like a midday reporter. Does that apply? Like even if you were off campus and you learn information?
No, I think that this is about proper consent. Like, if you need to ask questions that are sensitive to do a great project, I think you should be willing to do that, but also then be very careful about the type of consent, and there's naturally there's balances for that. So if you're getting into questions like that, where it's really, really sensitive information, okay, that's when guidance from an IRB is actually really helpful. Okay, because it's not that you need it, it's more that they have the expertise to navigate the trade-offs between the benefits and costs of the type of information that you're getting. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Is your question about your sort of role as a teaching assistant?
No, I mean, it's just like how far does that responsibility go, right?
So you'd have to have a real good need for asking about undocumented status, or have you experienced intimate partner violence? Have you experienced if you're talking to there are lots of vulnerable populations, prisoners, children that can't give consent. So if you're talking to your child and asking if their parents abuse them, these are very, very specific things, and we as a group and advisors would have spoken about that before you even got to that stage, and we'd have discussed whether or not the IRB. So I don't think you're going to get down that path like when you're talking on the phone. So normally who you'll be talking to is the program manager of the Children's Services Division of Los Angeles County. They are not going to give you individual case because they can't legally anyway, but they're going to be telling you about the processes that they go through and that they're working through, and that's the kind of information you actually need for the most part, right? For all of you. You want sort of the processes, the decision-making criteria, etc. You probably don't need to talk to the child themselves and their experience, probably. But if you do, we have a process for it, and we will all have to have discussed it well in advance. That's all. So you're not gonna fall into that situation.
Yeah, no, it wasn't.
So that's the way. There's
question
a
about
natural progression.
But the question about our responsibilities is to evaluate those costs and benefits and protections. And even then, if the IRB isn't required, I would recommend that we go to the IRB because they help navigate those decision makings and also the protocols and protections. They'll say, oh, you're collecting this data, you can only store it on this and that, you have to restrict this. Like, I'm aware of those things, but I might miss it because I'm not an expert in that. I've only interfaced it for my own projects. So they're our partners in this. Yeah, but we always have that responsibility. Thanks for the question. Okay. Okay, so let's go to this last section here. I think we've kind of already touched upon all of these things, where you should be now, okay? Right now, you really should be finalizing your team, your client, and beginning to hone your APP question. As I said in the past, earlier, that's also a conversation that you'll have over this next month even if you're really clear about your APP client and the question, I guarantee you, it'll change in 4 weeks. In 4 weeks from now, it will have changed, okay? Because this is a natural honing of it to make sure that it really is a good question, it's addressable, it's viable, it can be successful, hits all the marks of being timely and well constructed. So it'll definitely be refined. So right now these things are tentative. Okay, so go ahead and submit this. Okay, so here, class 2. Okay, class 2. First of all, you're going to be submitting this by 4 p.m. next week. Okay, submit to Kevin. Kevin, is there like an online portal or template?
Yeah, I've been asking folks to submit register your APP group. I will share it again.
Okay, great. So there's a form that you fill out, so it's gonna be really well organized. And submit that to Kevin by 4 p.m. next Monday. That same day, earlier in the day, we'll have our second class, and in that class we're gonna go over an overview of the substance of the APP. The organization of the logic behind it. You'll get a better sense for what I mean, that there's no constraints that you really have in terms of expectations and methodologies, so on and so forth, except for adhering to a broader logical framework, of course. Okay, and so we'll cover that, as well as we'll jump into a bit about some of the tools you might avail yourselves of, like survey methodology. Professor Gillens will present on. Professor Panofsky is going to come and give a special presentation on qualitative methods, which is just a really great topic. And then I'll do some on quantitative analysis, but really my part of it will just give an overview of the larger APP structure. Okay. And then after that, that's next Monday, and then by the end of the week, you'll get your advisor assignments. At that point, reach out to your advisor to schedule when your one-on-one meetings will be. Okay? Your one-on-one meeting will be the time that you meet in these bi-weekly meetings. This quarter it's bi-weekly. Winter is weekly. Okay. So schedule that bi-weekly meeting. Okay, you can decide whether it's in person, remote, or that's just at that point between you and the advisor. And then ahead of that first meeting, meeting will be that week of October 18th. Come to that meeting, okay, having read, part 1 of the Practical Guide to Policy Analysis. Come to that meeting with the potential clients that you have in mind, and the potential APP questions, and some data and assessment that you've made about the viabilities of those APP projects and clients, okay? That's the really important thing, because that's the first time you really can start discussing the viability of different options that you have and directions forward. And as I said before, if you want to chat about the APP prior to that, October 18th is, a few weeks away. Reach out to one of the advisors prior to the assignment. That might not be your advisor, but just reach out to them and get some early feedback. Okay. All right. That's all we have right now. Good luck. Pulling things together. And again, reach out to me and Kevin if you're in a group of less than 4. Okay. All the other groups, be open, especially the groups of 4. Be open to welcoming a teammate, a new teammate. Okay, we'll try to make sure that these things are matched up well. Or maybe we won't do that. We'll see how many groups we have. Okay.